Hey everybody, it's episode 2 of series 3 of UIO, the podcast for teen girls. Hugs to everyone and thank you for joining UIO, the podcast for teen girls. It is for you and about you inside out. I am Sonja Lewis, your host. Today we're talking about emotional bullying, a form of emotional abuse, an elusive topic. Unlike physical bullying, you can't see it, but all the same, it is equally as damaging and has long-lasting effects. Although emotional abuse happens in intimate, close-up relationships, it can also happen in the form of emotional bullying in schools, clubs, sports teams, and so on, wreaking havoc on self-worth and confidence. Here to help us understand, recognize it, and stop it in its evasive tracks is Jillian JJ Simmons. A veteran radio host residing in Houston, Texas, USA, JJ is founder of I'm Me Foundation to help girls and young women build character and self-esteem. Author of Without Bruises, JJ shares her own personal story of being in an emotionally abusive relationship. Her openness and honesty are much appreciated. It's not always easy to speak up on such a difficult issue, yet doing so benefits so many people. Welcome, JJ, and thanks so much for bearing your soul via your book, your foundation, the talks you give, and for being our guest on UIO.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be a part of your podcast today.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, emotional abuse is a big topic, often associated with intimate relationships. But now in the UK, emotional abuse within intimate or family relationships is actually now illegal and punishable by a sentence of up to 5 years in prison. And this is a clear message that emotional abuse is not acceptable. However, emotional abuse can also happen in the form of emotional bullying, in which you're not necessarily close to the person or persons. For anyone, identifying emotional abuse, also known as psychological abuse, can be tricky, as you write so clearly and beautifully about in Without Bruises. But the bruises are there, inside. You just can't see them, which is why it's so hard to address from a practical and emotional standpoint. I like Health Direct from the Australian government's definition. Emotional abuse is about one person maintaining power or control over another person. And what follows naturally when you're controlled is an undermining of self-worth and confidence, which brings on anxiety, depression, and stores up serious mental health problems. For teenage girls, as they begin to explore more close-up relationships, whether with friends of same or opposite sex, explore dating, or they begin to relate to more people through school, clubs, sports, religious affiliations, and so on, I believe it is crucial to understand what is normal and healthy in relating to another person. Otherwise, emotional abuse can be easily mistaken as the norm, particularly if it is in the form of emotional bullying. It's also important to know what emotional abuse is not. There are healthy disagreements. No two people are the same, but anything that makes you feel threatened, undermined, needs to be considered. JJ, it's a complex topic. Thus, I'd love to start out by getting your take on what emotional abuse is all about. What are some of the reasons people abuse others emotionally?
A lot of times it comes from their childhood, what they've seen in their own home that has become their norm, and they're only projecting onto other people what has been projected onto them. And a lot of times, maybe it isn't necessarily that same type of abuse, but what you can absolutely see in a lot of abusers is there is some type of history of abuse or trauma in their life. The tricky part about emotional abuse is a lot of times it's so insidious that you don't know it's happening until it's too late and you've kind of been wrapped in this web. People may take some things that are emotional abuse lightly, name calling or telling somebody, you're fat, or what we call bullying is really emotional abuse. You're saying something to make someone feel a certain way and it's not positive. And so it can easily be considered emotional abuse. I remember my boyfriend at the time keeping me from my friends, but how he did it was he would say things like, I just I don't want you to go out with them. I'd rather you just stay at home. And even though he wasn't even going to be at home, it's just, I want you to be the first person I see when I come home. And then when I
Mm.
come home, so it's like, it's not that I want to spend time with you. It's that I just don't want you to spend time with anyone else. And
Mm.
sometimes what it looks like is love. Oh my gosh, he wants me to be the first person that he sees when he gets home. He doesn't want me to go out because he wants me to stay here so he can see me. And you have to pay so close attention to
Mm.
the manipulation and the control because you can really easily miss it or misinterpret it and think that it's something else.
There's so many myths about why people become targets of abusers or bullies. I mean, you talked about that oftentimes people who become abusers, it's historical. There are different reasons for that. But so many of us take it personal. And as you pointed out, sometimes you don't really know what's going on. It's insidious, it's manipulative. You don't always know what's really happening to you. And I think that makes it easier to take it quite personal. Can you shed some light on this?
Yeah. One thing I will say, and I can only share from my personal experience, I am considered an empath. And empaths are just the perfect target for narcissists and sociopaths and abusers. So empath is a person who takes on other people's pain. So
Ah.
if you're in a relationship with someone who's an abuser and you know a little bit about their past, or you can feel their pain from what has happened to them, you're
Mm.
more likely to stick around in that relationship, and you're trying to fix a person or you feel like you can help. And that's not always the case. And we have to understand, while we care, and it's okay to genuinely care for someone and want to see the best in someone, you also can't make someone do anything. You can't change anyone, and they have to be able to change those things themselves.
Mm.
So, yeah, while it is very easy to take things personal, the complex part is understanding whether the person who is abusing you is really conscious of what's happening,
Mm.
or if they are really oblivious to it. And that's
Yeah.
almost the where you have that fine line between sociopaths and narcissists, where one person may really understand exactly what they are doing and one person may not.
Yeah, this is really enlightening because it sounds a bit like enabling, which is a very familiar term with, enabling somebody to do a certain thing, but you think you're helping them. That's something really to look out for and just to see if that's something that's going on in oneself.
Yeah, if you're in a relationship and you find yourself constantly taking on that person's pain, you're basically like holding your hand out. Hey, give this to me. I know what's going on with you. I know what your father did to you. I know how your mother abused. Give it all to me. That's what an empath does.
Mm.
And like you said, which enables that person. It's like, hey, I'll take responsibility for what has happened to you. And it's not ever your responsibility at all.
Yeah, and it's too heavy and and
It
and it, and it
is.
gets to mental health. And I do want to talk about that, but I want to ask you a couple more questions before we talk about the impact that emotional bullying and emotional abuse has on mental health. But I think about, bullying and abuse, as you say, we tend to say, oh, that person's just being a bully and it'll go away. It's a horrible, horrible experience. And I don't think that I've had a really long-term experience of going through anything quite as traumatic as emotional bullying. But I can think back to my teenage years, and there were indeed times in my life when someone undermined me or isolated me or called me names, you pointed out earlier,
Mhm.
and sort of began to do it consistently. And I think that would be emotional abuse if you
Yes.
feel uncomfortable. And I sort of remember each and every day that I would always avoid that person. I didn't want to be around that person because that person made me feel uncomfortable. And I remember one specific situation, and that was sitting at the back of the school bus. I didn't like it, and I wouldn't do it because I knew that I would be subjected to this kind of thing. And I know
Yeah.
times have changed a lot since I was a teenage girl. But what can girls do? What are some things that they might be able to do to avoid emotional abuse? And I'm going to call it emotional bullying, like within the school setting.
Avoiding it is never, it's just impossible, to actually avoid it
Oh,
because
dear.
people are everywhere. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And with access to social media now and the effects that social media is having on our young people, it's insane. And so what I would recommend what I do recommend to a lot of the girls in our programs is one, to make sure that you are telling an adult and you are also keeping track of the bullying and that's taking place. So writing it down and keeping in a journal. But the first thing is making sure someone else knows about it. And
Hmm.
it's extremely important. Also, I always recommend that, especially with our girls, we have to know who we are. And so doing the work at the core
Mm.
and reminding ourselves of who we are is helping to build this wall that blocks the emotional abuse,
Mm.
which means if I know who I am and I know that I am strong and I am courageous and I am beautiful and I am an amazing person, then when people try to tell me different, it bounces off because I know who I am. And it's a very powerful way for us to disregard that emotional abuse and push it away. And it starts with who we are and just understanding who we are, because what happens is we take those words and those words sink into us because we aren't confident in who we are, and so we start to believe the words that other people are sharing with us, and they're all lies. And so it's just really important, I think, more than anything, is to dive into who you are and to start building your self-esteem and your self-worth so that when those moments do come, you can trust me. I know I've been there before and I'm in the public eye, which allows me to get bullied probably more than the average. And I hear horrific things about me and see it on social media. And now it's gotten to the point where it's laughable to me. I can
Mm.
laugh at it, but there was a time where it was really hard for me to hear people say you're ugly or I hate your hair or whatever.
Mm.
But I had to build my self-esteem. And so now I can kind of look and laugh, or I've learned to compliment people. There was a guy on my social media. I had put up a post. It was like a motivational post, and he responded. He said, "You're
Mm-hmm.
so ugly."
Oh, dear.
And I'm thinking, it's a motivational post.
Yeah,
How in the
yeah.
world did this come? And I went to his page because this is what we do. We go to the person's page to see who they are and
Yes.
and I looked and I said, guys, this guy is really actually handsome. And so I responded back to him and I said, despite how you feel about me, I think you're handsome. And he responded back and I was really shocked that he apologized. And he said, I am so sorry for what I said about you. I apologize. And I told him, I wrote back and I said, no problem. And the thing is how you respond. I could have responded in a negative way and we would have had a whole thread of going back and forth, and that takes up
Mm.
too much energy and time. But instead, I said, you know what? I respond out of love because ultimately the people who are projecting these things onto you, it's an issue with their own self-esteem. And you have
Yeah.
to know it's not personal. It is so deep within them and it has nothing to do with you. So if at the end of the day you do anything else, just give love because love will always win.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I mean, that's amazing. And there's so much in there. Our first podcast in this series was on character building. And you talked a lot about really, even whether it was indirectly or directly, just knowing who you are, knowing your character strengths and using them to protect yourself in these kinds of situations. And then obviously, you talked a lot about self-esteem, and I'm right there with you, because I think in a situation like the one that you described, maybe what happens when your self-worth is not there, you don't really believe in yourself and you don't love yourself. I'm not sure if you always hit back. Sometimes you just sort of curl up in a ball, and it just affects you that much more. Talk to us a little bit about how it impacts your mental health.
Being in an abusive relationship, I lost a lot of my self-worth, and that alone led to depression, which is affecting your mental health, your self-esteem, and how you feel about yourself. Was in depression for almost a year. And think about this, just based off of someone using words, my brain was so twisted. And I remember my father saying to me, he said, Jillian, I want you to see a therapist. And I said, Daddy, I don't need to see a therapist. He needs to see a therapist. And my dad's like, he said, Jillian, you have to trust me on this. My dad, he was a former police officer, and he said to me, I will never forget this, sitting in his kitchen. And he said, I've seen women go through this before, and everything you're describing about this person, he has abused you. And I could not wrap my mind around understanding that what had taken place was abuse. And he said, you need to get some help now. And I saw my father cry for the first time ever in my life as a grown woman. And I said, okay. So I went to therapy. And when I went to therapy, I discovered so much more than what I expected. I found that the reason why I was meeting these types of men who were emotionally abusive had to do with the emotional abuse from my mother, and why it was so familiar to me. I was comforted by these types of people because it was what I was used to. There's these deeper issues that we have no idea about that's affecting everyone. And ultimately, this is what we're talking about when we talk about mental health. We have to sit down and work out these issues. And a lot of times we feel like we don't have issues. And we all have issues. There's always something we are all working on inside of us. And we can't be afraid to talk about it anymore, because it's affecting our generation. It's affecting the people around us. It's affecting our loved ones. It's affecting how we show up for work and for school. And it's just so imperative that we take the time to get those issues taken care of so that we can have great mental health and successful lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. JJ, I feel like saying Jillian, but I'll say JJ because it's what I'm used to. But it's a really tough one, because you began to understand these things as an adult woman, and we're talking about teenage girls. And your example that you've shared with us, your own personal story, it's a really deep one, and it's a really tricky one, because we're talking about your mother. So if our teenage girls are finding some of these patterns in their lives, what can they do to change beliefs or to begin to understand? They may not be able to extract themselves from the situation, immediately, but what can they do to begin to understand that emotionally abusive behavior, it's not normal. These things that we say, oh, that's just normal. She's just like that. That's her personality, and you have to put up with it. It will go away one of these days, and so forth and so on. But within their control, within their gift, as teenagers, what can they do to begin to change some of the space around them?
It's interesting because we can only control what we can control, right? And so I know that I'm coming home to an abusive environment. Then what is it that I have control over? Well, I have control over whether I stay in the same room with this person, or maybe I need to dive into things that I love and that I enjoy, and talking about it, journaling, is very helpful. When you're in a space where you can't express yourself the way that you really desire to, journaling will help to relieve that stress. And so you just have to know your circumstances and your current environment is not a reflection of you. You will get up out of this situation. You will have a better life. Take notes on what's happening here and understand this doesn't have to be your life.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it's one of those very, very sensitive issues. And I think it's also important to have a balance and to understand that there are healthy relationships, there are healthy disagreements. And I loved what you said about doing things that make you happy, doing things that you're very interested in, more creative things, and so forth and so on. So I think that's really important. Well, you talked about getting out of the relationship. If you weren't out of the relationship, we might not be having this podcast.
Yes,
But you're out
exactly.
and you're in your book and everything. But
Yeah.
you don't really know what's going on, and you begin to realize that you're emotionally unwell, you're physically unwell, all these things. And so you begin to see something. What can you do to get out? And particularly, you talked about being an empath. How can you break patterns if this is something that has happened to you repeatedly?
I'm not going to sugarcoat this at all. It is extremely challenging to
Mm,
leave an abusive relationship. And that's why you have so many people, even with physical abusive relationships, you see how many times women will stay, and
mm,
you wonder, well, why? Oh my gosh, how in the world would they stay? And I have experienced it to know why, and it's almost like an addiction. So
mm,
picture, a person who smokes cigarettes, right? We
mm-hmm.
can tell you all day, hey, you know what your lungs look like. I can show you a whole video on what your lungs look like, on what can happen, on the different cancers you can get.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet a person will tell you who smokes cigarettes, it's hard for me to walk away. And it's because it's an addiction. And so,
Mm,
which still is going back to mental health. It's a
mm,
mental thing.
mm-hmm.
And and so it is very challenging to walk out of an abusive relationship, especially when there is a lot of control and manipulation, because they can swoop you back in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to keep telling yourself, I deserve better. You have to start visualizing the life that you really desire,
Mm-hmm.
and like really you write it down, write out what it is that you really want, and you start looking at this and you keep telling yourself, this isn't it. This is
Mm,
not it. And once again, surrounding yourself with people who love you, listen to your friends and your family, understand that they want the best for you, and a lot of times they can see the things you cannot see. And so, yeah, getting help and helping someone to kind of give you those tools to walk away.
yeah, I think that's such an important message. When you're in school, for example, hopefully in most schools, there are counselors or an adult or someone who you can go and talk
Yeah,
to.
it's so important.
Well, we can't have a podcast without talking about social media. We've mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I want to
Yeah.
talk about it from two angles. The first one, of course, has to be, has social media had any bearings on promoting emotional abuse, emotional bullying? And when we talk about that, then I'd like to know if there are suggestions of how to use social media to positively influence, to change this message.
Yeah. Okay. Well, social media, I'm just being so honest. It drives me crazy. It blows me away because social media, it has created monsters. And even Mark Zuckerberg said it himself. He doesn't even allow his own kids on social media. There's no way to control it. And so, yes, it has such a huge impact, when the access that you have to people that you would never normally have, being able to say things that you would
Mm.
never say to a person's
And
face.
that's so key. Like that guy said that to you. He would never say
Yeah,
that to you. He
he
would
would
never
never have
walk
said
up
that
on the
to my
streets and
face.
said, "Oh, I think you're
Yeah.
very ugly." No.
Yeah, never. And so without there being any type of restrictions or guidelines or any type of control, it's just madness out there. And so I just read this, well, it was a couple of years ago. It was in Forbes magazine. It said 63% of millennials are depressed
Mm,
due to social media. So you mean to tell me that not only am I going there and I'm feeling a certain type of way because I'm comparing myself to other people, because that's real. And then you're also on social media and people you're from your school are saying things or posting things about you. We had a guy in Houston who a boy committed suicide. People posted up pictures of him and his girlfriend being intimate,
mm,
and it got back to his parents, and he committed suicide at school.
mm,
And like the same day that this stuff came out, and it's like, hey, there's no way to regulate any of this stuff. And so
mm,
it's so important that we have these kind of conversations on mental health, and we come up with our own tools on how to navigate through social media. Also, I would really suggest limiting your time on social media
mm.
because it can be obsessive.
I think that's such an important message. I want to ask you, as we're coming to the end of the podcast, do you have any key messages that you would like to leave with our teenage girl listening audience?
Yes, I want these young ladies to know that they have the opportunity to make the world a better place, and they have the power and the greatness that is inside of them. We all come from greatness. It is all up in us. And I really want these ladies to share their greatness with the world, to know that no one should have this much access to you. If you are, it's like one of my friends always talks about how we as women are fine china. Fine china doesn't sit with the rest of the dishes. Fine china sits, right? It sits in a nice cabinet where it's closed in, and it's not because it's better than anything else, but it has more value, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a difference. You have value, and you have to know your value and know your worth. And once you figure that out, you will move in this world and navigate through this world so much better. And you just have to know it, and you can find it and dig down into yourself, affirm yourself every single day.
That's amazing. Do you have any further hot tips to offer on how to stay safe and well?
Yeah, listen, I know this sounds so crazy and everyone's always telling me, I gotta drink water. But I'm like, this is serious. Take care of your bodies. Being fit isn't about having some cute abs to wear in a bikini. It's about taking care of your mind through physical fitness. So
Mm,
making sure that you are exercising, you are eating healthy, you are drinking that water is so important. But feeding your mind, what are you feeding your mind every day? Stop with all this garbage and pay attention to the music you're listening to, the books you're reading, the television shows that you're watching, and ask yourself every day, what am I feeding myself? Am I feeding myself mentally, physically, spiritually, what I need to be the best version of me?
that is absolutely amazing, JJ. Thank you so much for being our guest on UIO. We're just
Thank
really thankful to
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You all have a great one.
That is a wrap for UIO on emotional bullying. Great show with lots of insight from Jillian JJ Simmons. Thank you, girls, for listening, and thank you, God, for the opportunity to do the show. Today, I want to pray about taking the mask off of emotional abuse and seeing it for what it is. I pray for more protection for all children the world over and for educational opportunities and tools to prevent emotional abuse and bullying in their lives. Also, I pray for support on these insidious issues in whatever settings they're in. I ask these blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Stay tuned for more Straight Talk in 2 weeks with Lindsay Turnbull, founder of Misheard Media. We'll talk about girls' rights. Meanwhile, hit me up on Twitter at Sonja Lewis, Instagram at Sonja D. Lewis, Facebook, www.sonjalewis.com/UIO-podcast. Tell me what you want to hear about and keep sending those questions on any of the episodes. Take care of you inside out, and remember,